And welcome back to the Health Show, a coronavirus special live show where I'm joined by Dr. Imran Gohar, and who is of course a general practitioner, and Sidra Naeem, who's a Muslim chaplain and alima. Now remember, if you would like to find out about coronavirus or its symptoms or even how you could help, then as always the website to go to is 111.nhs.uk/COVID-19. That's where you go for more information. The website's on the bottom of your screen. It's the same one we show every week, but we hear lots of myths and different bits and pieces out there. So that's the one that you want to be able to ensure that you get the right information. Should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. What are some of the common kind of ailments that people might have but are not coming to see you about at the moment?
So every day I'm getting a calls of 2 or 3 urine infection queries basically from females, which is very common and can be dealt at home very easily. So similarly, abdominal pain is the other one. The other one which we are seeing is anxiety attacks. People are worried about the whole pandemic and they're getting anxiety attacks. Majority of time feeling shortness of breath at night without having any COVID symptoms. So yeah, these are the most common problems. The saddest part of this pandemic is that the other patients right now, unfortunately, are not getting attention from the GP as we used to do before. And the reason is because, of course, it is more dangerous to invite people at the hospital and the surgeries.
And some people, I can imagine, some people might have been maybe going a little bit sooner than they needed to go before, but now we're getting the other extreme where people aren't being seen. And at what point, of these fairly common ailments, at what point should people say, actually, enough's enough, I do need to go and see the doctor, I do need this to be treated? How long should people leave it when it starts as a fairly mild condition? At what point should they do something about it?
Well, every condition has a different guidelines, and I think it is something which we are telling our patients on the phone, and we will be trying to do that on the GP Bites as well to relay that to our patients. Obviously, it's not going to cover everything, but it's going to cover majority of minor ailments which can be dealt at home without seeing your doctor. We are in a different scenario. We are in a different environment now. We have to think differently. People need to learn also to think differently as well, and they have to do self-help as much as they can. People have to change their behavior, how they used to see the doctor.
And it's not necessarily a bad thing, but I noticed you were talking about anxiety there, and I know, Sidra, with your work, being a chaplain, you obviously work with people a lot when it comes to anxiety, when it comes to stress. And there's a huge amount of stress that maybe will only exhibit itself in the home and not beyond at the moment.
There's so much anxiety at the moment, especially with people who have got pre-existing mental health conditions. That there's been a huge rise in their problems. There's anxiety over the virus to begin with, where people didn't know what it meant, how it works. Are they going to die? Is it going to affect their children? Now the latest anxiety is the children being at home. What do we do? They have to, the mothers are having to teach the children the curriculum which the schools have had to deal with. There are parents who've got children who've got special educational needs. For those kinds of parents, their respite was to send the children to school, but now they're having to deal with the children at home.
And we're having to create new routines because, we have a routine, even if it was stressful beforehand, which for many people it was, but now we're getting into a scenario where people are creating new routines, which creates a whole load of stress in itself.
Definitely. I think the main problem is actually the routine, because mums are not keeping the same timetable as schools. So children are waking up at midday, having their breakfast really late and then sleeping really late, and it's affecting the children's moods, it's affecting the mothers. It's very important that if you're going to homeschool them, which all mothers are required to do at the moment, the children are kept with the routine of the school. Very, very important.
And actually that goes for normal things, doesn't it? When it comes to stress, it's the fact that I've heard a lot of people say, get up at the time you would have got up, make sure you're fully dressed, don't just hang around the house in your pajamas or dressing gown or something, and try and create a normal daily routine as close to what you would have had beforehand, because that will give you some sense of normality.
Exactly, and that's very important. So children, they do need to get changed as if they are going to school, but obviously not in their uniform. And
I put them in the uniform as well, why not?
lunch needs to be on time, dinner needs to be on time, fit in all your activities in between, keep up with your salahs as well. With the Muslim community, all the things which are being done that were being done in the madrasas, in the mosques, now have to be mimicked at home. You cannot just leave all the Islamic studies as well.
And we'll talk a little bit more about, faith, because we've got less than a week now till Ramadan.
Yes.
With everyone getting ready for Ramadan, there's a whole new wave of questions and thoughts and concerns that will be going through people's minds. So we'll definitely touch on faith in a moment. But I just want to come back to a little bit more about the health things. Maybe, Doctor, if you can give us a bit of an update of some of the things that, from your perspective as a GP, that you've been seeing over the last week. There seems to be this idea that we don't really want to recognise a peak too much yet because, A, we might not be quite at it, but more importantly, we don't want people to relax. Would that be an accurate viewpoint?
Well, I think I disagree with this, actually, term we're using consistently on the media about peak. Peak of what? I think if we are talking about peak of deaths, are we talking about peak of... Because this virus, it's an invisible virus. We don't know who's going to catch it when. Yesterday or 2 days ago, I think we had a reduction in death rates, but suddenly it got up again. So I think more than worrying about the peak, because it gives a wrong impression to people, peak means it's going to go down now. We don't know it's going to go down or not. I think what people need to do is to follow the advice of staying at home, washing their hands, following the other advices, staying apart 2 meters or 3 meters apart when you're going out, and work from home as much as possible. Because we don't know whether there's going to be a rebound or not. We don't know when the peak is going to be, actually. This is something we need to understand. And I've noticed, actually, even today, I mean, I was seeing more cars on the road than last week, actually.
Funny you should say that. I noticed that coming in today as well. And I think there's definitely this sense of urgency from the government that they don't, there's been calls for some of them to talk about what's going to happen at the end of the pandemic and things. And the government almost, it seems to make sense to, just focus on what we're doing at the moment. We don't want to give anyone any excuse to have a let up because we might let this thing, just keep going for even longer.
We have to understand, I mean, in UK, the majority of the cases we are seeing from end of March, actually, which are basically, if you look at the incubation period from 2 to 3 weeks time, we're seeing majority of the cases getting mature now, people getting more ill. We're seeing more and more patients now. We're seeing more and more deaths now, actually, as well, unfortunately. So it's coming very close, and I'm sure people are hearing now from the last week or 2 weeks that they know somebody who had corona, and it's getting more and more now.
And one of the things that's interesting is this whole care home thing, because one of the things they're talking about testing now is the fact they're going to offer care home workers tests as well. And the fact that if we look at the cases, of course, in the UK, the amount of cases is, a lot of it's reflected by the amount of testing, because we're doing more testing. So actually, that's a bit of an inaccurate figure anyway.
I think testing itself, and I think we discussed it last week as well, that testing itself, I don't think is going to solve the problem. I think the key is going to be testing active COVID along with the antibody levels as well, that if you have had the immunity or if you got active COVID as well. So I think the government should concentrate on both of these things, actually, because let's say somebody already had a COVID and you're checking him after 2 to 3 weeks time, he's going to come negative. So I think, and especially the anxiety among the healthcare workers, nurses, doctors, healthcare assistants, and other workers, is that they don't know whether they are immune to it or not. So at least if you do the antibody levels for the healthcare workers, at least to begin with, then at least we will know whether...
And how far are we away from that test? Because I heard some news, I think on the way in this today, about Roche maybe have something, and we're hearing more and more. So give us the latest update in terms of the vaccine and, again, the tests, these antibody tests, to see whether people have actually had it or not.
Well, I think as far as I'm aware, vaccine is far away to be in the market right now. I think 12 to 18 months. As far as this antibody level testing is concerned, I think we're hearing from the last 2 weeks that it's going to be available in few days' time. Obviously, it's not easy to distribute all these things or market these things or make these things, because it's such a short period of time. And I think one of the problem in being available to all of us is because the accuracy of these tests, and I think that's what these companies are working on. And I think it is a valid point, but obviously people are dying, people are getting worse. So I think these are the things which is quite eminent, and we need it actually ASAP.
And we're going to come to Faith in a minute, but I've just got one more question from the health perspective. A lot of talk this week about face masks. We know that London has one of the highest cases because, again, any dense city is always going to have a higher rate of cases than rural areas where there's less population. So, London is very much seen as an epicenter really for the UK. Now, again, mixed messages about face masks. On one hand, he's saying, it would be a good idea for people going out and about their business. But on the other hand, we're hearing reports from people saying, well, it might give people this false idea of that they're protected or they're protecting others. And the fact that actually sometimes, people shouldn't really deflect away from some of the basics that we've heard all along. What's your view on some of those reports?
I think I always encourage wearing a face mask. It doesn't matter. If it's a normal face mask, or at least it's some protection. But the main protection of face mask is, let's say, if somebody is suffering from COVID and they cough and sneeze, at least they can limit the transmission of the viruses.
So it's more about protecting other people from people who've got it. So in other words, if you're wearing a face mask and you've got it, you're protecting other people. But it's not necessarily going to stop you inhaling if you've got a face mask.
So that's the first thing. I'm talking about a normal mask here. The mask which really protect against the coronavirus is FFP3, which is a higher level of mask, but it's not readily available for general public. Even for healthcare, actually, it's hard to get. But that's the only mask which can protect and stop the COVID-19. But yes, it's more essential for healthcare workers, because if you get the other thing about COVID to remember is the symptoms depend on the exposure as well. If you have a high exposure, for example, as a doctor, if I'm examining a patient and checking their throat or ears, where the main stay of this virus is, you can get a higher exposure actually. So obviously you need appropriate mask, so that even you can't, because don't forget, the patient who suffer from COVID, they shed viruses, okay? If they're walking, running, breathing, and it stays in the system, in the air for a time being, and before settling down on the surface. So whoever are close to them, for example, healthcare worker, they can inhale it. And the tiny particles, which are really, really tiny, can easily get into the system of healthcare worker if they're not wearing the appropriate mask. For people outside, I think if they're wearing a mask, at least a person who's, let's say, COVID, running beside you, not every COVID patient get symptoms, and they cough or they sneeze.
And at least it'll prevent them.
At least, instead of going 2 to 3 meters, the virus can stay within half a meter or even less than that, and at least the people around them is protected.
And I want to come to the topic of faith. I mentioned earlier on, and we'll certainly be talking more about this, and I'm sure some questions are going to come out about this in a while. And we will be taking your questions in the second half of the show as well. So stand by for that. We'll tell you about that in a moment. But before we go to break, Sidra, I'd like to ask you about preparations for Ramadan. And that combined with what we were talking about earlier on with the stress, what sort of messages would you like people within the Muslim community to take on board at the moment in their preparation for Ramadan, given this extraordinary circumstance we find ourselves in?
I think the main thing at the moment is to tell people not to worry. Like we have adapted so far within faith, we can adapt in Ramadan. So don't worry. Whatever you normally do, you can do it at home. The Tarawih prayers, people are really worried about those evening prayers because most people went to the mosque to pray those. It doesn't matter, you can pray them at home. You do not need to have a Hafiz Quran at home who knows the whole Quran off by heart. You can read your own surahs. You can read individually as well. You don't have to read in a group. But if there is somebody who's leading the prayers at home who knows even a couple of chapters of the Quran, then yes, you can read in congregation. Dates and things, if you do normally give them out to neighbours and things, online delivery nowadays.
And I think we're probably going to get more questions about this coming up in a moment. So if you do have any questions, please do let us know. Now, if you would like to call in and speak to our guests, you can do so now by calling 0208 555 2514. You'll see that on the bottom of your screen as well. So that's 0208 554 2514. Or you can email us at healthshow@islamchannel.tv. Now, with over 2 million people infected worldwide and 145,000 deaths, Africa is doing everything it can to contain the growing number of COVID-19 cases that are sweeping across the continent. Tighter measures have been enforced as the virus spreads beyond the capital cities. The World Health Organization says the total number of available beds in intensive care units in 43 African countries is equivalent to about 5 beds per million people in those reported countries. Now, this is compared to 4,000 beds per million in Europe. So a big, big difference. Now, here's a voiced report from AFP TV.
A team of Chinese medical professionals arrived in Abuja, bringing medical equipment worth about $1.5 million with them. Nigeria has over 280 confirmed cases of coronavirus and 6 deaths. The country's weak health system and population of nearly 200 million inhabitants means it's particularly vulnerable to infection.
We received support of all means from Nigeria. It's time for us to reciprocate the friendship and kindness.
Meanwhile, in Benin and Morocco, it's now compulsory for residents to wear masks at all times in public. Benin's government has subsidised the cost to around 30 US cents per mask, but that's still a lot for many. And those who can afford masks can't always find them.
They say it's compulsory, but I've come to buy some and I can't find any.
In Libya's capital Tripoli, members of the Libyan Red Crescent disinfected a building housing displaced people. The country, which is divided between a UN-recognised government based in Tripoli and a rival administration in the country's east, announced its first death from coronavirus earlier this week, so far recording 19 infected cases. The rise of coronavirus in Africa's war-torn Sahel has sparked fears for hundreds of thousands of displaced people in the region, who are packed inside camps. In the Senou camp on the outskirts of Mali's capital Bamako, refugees are fearful about the possible effects of the virus.
We're afraid of catching it, to the point that we can't sleep, day or night. I live here with my whole family, and if one of us were to get this disease, it would be a disaster. Unfortunately, we're here because we have no choice. We stay here imagining the worst, that one of us gets infected.
The economic consequences of coronavirus are being felt throughout the continent. Senegal announced an antivirus dusk to dawn curfew to curb the spread of coronavirus, which, along with flight restrictions and blow to European demand, has hit the country's fishing industry hard. Indirectly employing 500,000 people, the fishing industry represents 22.5% of export earnings. Sports events around the world have been cancelled as a result of the virus, but a team of South Sudanese sprinters are making the most of the situation. They were training in a Japanese town ahead of the now postponed Olympics, but have decided to stay until at least July, taking advantage of training facilities that aren't available to them in their home country. And finally, Burundi is one of the few countries around the world, along with Belarus and Tajikistan, to continue with its Football League fixtures. First Division team Vital OFC hope to reach the end of the championship on a high. Spectators' temperatures will be checked upon entry into stadiums, where hand washing will also be fervently encouraged.
They say that we have to wash our hands with soap or other antiseptic products and not get too close to people face to face. We should keep at least 1 meter away and not grease each other with our hands, not shake hands, no contact. So these are precautions that must be taken.
Burundi announced the discovery of the first 3 confirmed cases of COVID-19 earlier this week.
So some really interesting comparisons that we're seeing there across Africa. Now, thank you very much indeed. Lots of you are calling in, so we're going to go straight to the phone calls. So thank you, and keep those calls coming in. We've got Mohammed Hassan, who's calling from London. A very good afternoon to you. What would you like to ask?
I just want to ask, I'm really concerned. I've got 6 sons and they go out for shopping all the time. Is the sole that can we buy the best protective mask and other things what the doctors wear for our protection from the market? And if yes, what are their names, please?
Okay, so again, we were talking about this, funny enough, just before the break, weren't we, about protective masks and can we get them? Obviously, as we heard at the moment, they're not obligatory in the UK, but if people want to protect themselves and they want to have these masks, how available are they at the moment?
No, they're not, it's not easy to get actually right now. But yes, people are getting online, but I mean, slightly exaggerated prices. He asked about what kind of mask, so I can say the mask which is the best and protect against the COVID is FFP3, and if you can't get it, which is really hard to get, then you can get FFP2 mask, which does control the majority of coronavirus getting into your lungs or through your nose. So it prevents that. So the answer is these are the 2 masks. They are recommended for healthcare professionals and pretty good for preventing it. But if you're not healthcare professional, then you can wear any mask with a filter, and they will give you some resistance, but the FFP2 and FFP3 are the best one.
And again, the main message to get across to people is that we do want to make sure that people wash their hands and practice social distancing, all of the basics.
Absolutely.
Just in case you can't get masks. And maybe there might be a case to say, let the health professionals and those people in greatest need have those masks and other people.
Yes. Can I quickly just say, females can't get a mask, they can wear a niqab, and it does the same, it's the same purpose. And that's what a lot of sisters have been doing, wearing niqabs.
Okay.
Even if they don't normally wear them.
Okay, it is an option, of course.
Yes.
And actually just regular scarves. We've got Matt here in the studios here who's just putting a scarf around.
Yes.
Okay, we've got a call from Nigeria. I think it's a Mr. Johns.
Hello?
Hello, yeah, good afternoon. What would you like to ask?
What I'd like to ask is that, you're talking about this thing, I'm willing to come to treat some people spiritually, physically, to heal. This issue is invisible. I've prepared some things to treat it. But where I am, I'm far away. I'm in North Nigeria. Nasarawa State, last year.
Yeah, I understand that you're experiencing a lot of challenges there in Nigeria and that you have a lot of cases there.
No matter what the big case is, what I'm saying to come and help you people to do something to heal people.
Okay, well, again, this is really challenging, isn't it, for countries that don't have the same level of healthcare that we have. We talked in the introduction there about, the amount of beds per million people available and so on, and the shocking realization that in Africa they just don't have that support.
It's extremely challenging. It's challenging for developed countries. Look at America, look at Europe. So it's extremely challenging. I totally agree with that, and I don't think there is any answer for that. I think for people in any developed and underdeveloped country, I think advice is just to try and stay at home if you can. Obviously, I understand there are economic issues related to that, but unfortunately, I mean, life is much more important than anything else. So stay at home. Simple soap, best thing to kill the virus. Wash their hands with simple soap if they can't get any fancy gels and expensive soap. Simple soap is the best one.
And hopefully the rest of the world, when they get to a point where they're able to cope a little bit more, will, pour some resources into some of these African countries.
I was just going to touch in on that. There are quite a lot of Islamic organisations at the moment that are definitely sending supplies of masks and hand washes and things abroad and sanitisers. There's a lot out there going on.
And there's a lot of charities involved in that, as well as people like the United Nations, the World Health Organization, Red Cross and so on. So we really hope for whichever country you're in, and you are struggling and you're not getting that level of support that we're fortunate enough to have have here in Europe. We really hope that you're able to get that where you are. Just before we go to the next call, one of the things that we have got, and it reminded me there, hearing that gentleman speaking, there's people are turning to all sorts of different things for help here, and we can quite understand people's desperation when they don't have that level of support. Now, we know that it's written about black seed and how beneficial it is. But however, that does come with quite a warning in terms of for some people who might be just relying on that as a way of helping themselves.
Yes. So Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said that black seeds is a remedy for all diseases except death. That is in Bukhari and Muslim. And that is actually the Nigella sativa species of black seeds, which can be used. Modern day scientists have researched this, that how comes black seeds helps with diseases. The latest research by scientists in America have shown that it contains chloroquine, which is a special compound which is an antiviral, antibacterial agent. And there are lots and lots of other compounds in black seeds as well. So it can be used as a precaution. And if we follow the sunnah of the Prophet as much as we can, we are helping ourselves to protect ourselves.
But we should say people shouldn't be relying upon this.
Not completely, because if you get it, you will still get it with the will of Allah. So we have to put our trust in Allah as well. There are other things like Zamzam. Somebody did ask a question on Zamzam on the last show. Zamzam contains huge amounts of fluoride. And the fluoride is in such excess that it stops any other viruses or bacteria growing in your body when you take
Okay, well, and it's really good. We have this wonderful balance today on the show, as usual, where we've got faith and science, and the reality is that the true answers meet somewhere in the middle of all of this. You know, Doctor, from a medical perspective, what's your take on this?
Well, I think hydroxychloroquine is already been used in different countries and even in here. And has shown some benefits. Obviously, it's early days. It's a new virus, and research is not enough yet. So people are using the stuff which was just mentioned. And I think the point is people are using anything which has shown some results. Obviously, any research takes time, a lot of trials, and then people come to a final conclusion. But yeah, the early days, people are using hydroxychloroquine in hospitals, I'm aware of that, and other type of antiviral drugs, HIV antiviral drugs as well. And they are helping people, but not all of them.
And also, we should say they help to a certain amount.
Yeah.
I think the danger here is that some people will, you know, as often happens, they grab one small nugget of information, then all of a sudden that becomes the big cure. All of these things, it's about eating healthily, eating all the stuff that you would do to promote good health anyway.
Yes.
So really good advice from both of you. Thank you very much
building
indeed.
up immunity is very important. As well
and through nutrition, good nutrition
and exercise and lots of rest and sleep and healthy foods and all of that kind of stuff.
Good stuff. Good. Well, we've got another call now coming from Matthew. So a very good afternoon to you, Matthew. I believe you're in Nigeria as well. Good afternoon. What would you like to ask?
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon,
Yeah. Good afternoon. Go ahead.
Yes, sir. My own contribution here is I'm calling from Katsina, from Nigeria, Katsina State. And majority of people here in our state did not even believe with the virus. Because like now, even Friday prayer, it has been held in our state here. So me and my family, we try to now isolate ourselves, and we are not been going out. But the relation, any other person, many people from the neighbor, they used to come into my house. So what kind of advice can I get from the doctor? Because it's like the people here, they are not even believe with the virus. Friday prayer, it has held. We just come back from Friday prayer.
Well,
so I don't know if the doctor can give any advice to me, please.
Well, I think it's a very interesting question, Matthew, and thank you very much indeed for phoning in from Nigeria and asking us that.
Yes.
The challenge here with all countries is at the end of the day, a huge amount is going to come down to the legislation that a country itself does. And by the sounds of what Matthew was saying, their mosques are still open for Friday prayers. And of course, this is really contrary to most beliefs about social distancing, isn't it?
It's very challenging, actually. And I can tell Matthew one thing, that there will always be some population which will not believe on these things. And I mean, we do have that kind of people in Europe as well. So yes, but majority of the time, it's government responsibility actually. It come up with the trust on your government as well, actually, how much people trust the information coming out, the amount of education people have. So it's a combination of thing. But I think one thing is for sure, that what everybody got responsibility in this. I think everybody who believe and who know and who's educated to pass the message to people and do it consistently. Obviously, there will be people who will not listen. Unfortunately, that's beyond our control.
It's very, very difficult. What do you say about this whole thing with the mosques? Because if the mosques are open, are you obliged to go to the mosque? Or can you say, actually, I know the advice is to stay at home and then conduct your prayers at home?
Now, this is a very interesting question. Friday prayers are fard in Islam. However, if you feel by going you're going to do a greater bad, so for example, killing one person is like killing the whole of mankind, which is the saying in our religion in the Quran, that overrides the fard, the good of the fard. So in that case, really, then you should pray Jummah at home.
So to people like Matthew, we should be saying, absolutely, although the country hasn't closed your mosques, absolutely, from watching this programme and other advice that actually you should be staying away from the mosque, and therefore you can, conduct your Friday prayers at home in the full knowledge that you're doing it for the right reason.
If you want to stay safe and you want to protect others, and there's the fear that you may have it and that will kill others, that will override the good of fard.
Brilliant advice.
So in that case, read at home. You can read Jummah as Dhuhr at home. But also, if you've got 3 or more male people in your home, you can actually read Jummah at home with an adhan and a sermon.
And as you've said before, there's always ways around these things, given these current circumstances. I'm just going to go to the calls again, if you don't mind, because we've got so many people phoning in at the moment. We've got Danish from Dublin. A very good afternoon to you. What would you like to ask?
Hello. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I have got 3 quick, 1 or 2 questions and 3 another comment. The first thing I want to say is, it's not a question. It's a comment that while you are talking, it must be fully and thoroughly emphasized the mosques should be closed and locked to the public. They should not be there to be 5 or 7 or 10. This message should not only go circulate here in UK, but also in countries which are a bit backward and they consider their obligation to attack go to the mosque. So there should be no question that it should be open or not open. They must be closed. That's it. Number 1. Number 2, I want you to actually discuss this more than the preventive cure for diseases like coronavirus, rather than just the treatment. What have we found? That bat has been eaten, or whatever different, Islamic animals and things, they are eaten freely and frequently in Philippines, like they eat all the dogs. So I think there should be some norm. There should be some policy which governs as to what should be eaten, because whatever you eat here can affect the people anywhere in the world. So I think we should give them some sort of food for thought as to what should we do. People take their cats and dogs, which are dirty as well, and they bring them in their bed, whatever they have. So I think we should, convince people what is right and what is not. Number third question is the chloroquine thing that you are saying. Definitely there is a decreased number of effectives in countries like Pakistan, Bangladesh, India. So obviously it means something, because they are least organized, but still the number of the effectives is much less. So I hope that if you want to ask me anything, I can answer. But otherwise, I think you should consider that preventive measures have to be taken now.
Danish, thank you very much indeed for your questions. I really appreciate it. But we're going to deal with the questions that you've dealt with there. One of the things we should say is that we're not a political show, so we can't get involved in the politics of other countries and what people do and don't do. Obviously, here in the UK, we follow the rules that have come down from our government, which have said that mosques should close. And certainly that's the recommendation. But that's for other countries to decide what they do and when they do it. The only thing I will quickly pick up before we come to you, Mahmood, and I know you're waiting there, but we're going to come to you in just a moment. But Just to deal with the preventative things there. Now, obviously, you know, he has a viewpoint there about different animals and
Yes.
and so on.
Yes.
I would rather not maybe tackle that particular, because that's, you know, everyone has their own individual thoughts on that, but definitely the concept of preventative measures, i.e. we talked about this just beforehand, didn't we, about the way we should be looking after our diet, the things we should be doing to keep ourselves as healthy as possible, because there was a statistic in the UK that 90% of people who had tragically lost their lives so far with COVID-19 in the UK did have underlying health problems. So if people can improve their health generally
Yes.
by preparing good food and so on,
Yes.
that's going to
Yes.
help. So what sort of things do you think they should be doing?
Now, there
Sidra?
is a new acronym which came out, especially for the coronavirus, which builds up your immunity, and it's called New Start. N stands for nutrition. That includes eating healthy foods, fresh fruit, vegetables. Pests is one thing we don't eat in Islam, and that's because they are scavengers and that causes disease. So with all the bats problem and all of this, we wouldn't be allowed to eat those. E, exercise. That includes prayer, meditation, all of that helps with immunity. W, plenty of water, hydration always helps, just with normal flus, including corona. And then S is sunshine. We're all happier in the sunshine. Sunshine builds up your immunity system, sunlight. Where are we at? T, temperance. So limiting sugar, alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, those kinds of substances. A, fresh air. 1 walk a day is actually being recommended by the government.
Okay, really quickly.
R
and
is
T.
rest,
Yep.
sleep, plenty of sleep.
And T, the final
and
T.
T is trust in Allah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much indeed. We have another call coming in. I believe this is Mahmood. Very good afternoon to you, Mahmood. What would you like to ask?
Yes, good afternoon. Anyway, my question is this to Dr. Gaur, is I'm a type 2 diabetic, and in the last few weeks during the lockdown, my feet are very cold and very tired, and I feel like there is no blood circulation, and they're like numb, like a dead wood. So could you please advise me what should I do to improve my health? That's all my question. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, and thank you very much indeed for your keeping your question nice and crisp and short for us as well. We thoroughly appreciate that. Although we do welcome people's opinion, we should say that. Although everyone's going to have very different opinions, this is always a good platform on the Islam Channel to help people with that. But we do ask, please keep your comments and questions to the subject of health, and yes, please keep them short. That's very much appreciated too. So, very specific question there. Mahmood has diabetes and he's finding this numbness in his toes. What would you advise?
He didn't mention what kind of diabetes he's got actually. Is it he's on tablets or he's on insulin? The other factor is how long.
He apparently said type 2.
Type 2 diabetes,
Yeah.
okay. So if he got prolonged diabetes, one of the complications of diabetes is numbness, tingling, sensation in your peripheries. And that could be the case as well. If it is something suddenly came up, then it could be psychological related as well. Normally people who have uncontrolled diabetes can have this. The other thing which he can check, if it's something a short term, started a week or 2 weeks ago, to check his, if he got a machine at home, check the sugar levels, check the blood pressure, and if he's been put on any new medication, check the new medication as well, and see if that makes sense or not, and tell his GP, and he can advise on that basis.
Really good advice. It's like anything. We say this on every show, don't we? If you notice anything different, if anything sort of becomes worse, then that's the time. Then actually you do need to call your GP. I know people are reluctant to take up their time, but if something is getting worse, then it's really important that they do that. I
think right now the situation is, personally, I'm encouraging patients to actually self-care a lot. For example, if a patient got a blood pressure monitor, I always encourage in the past as well for people especially for people who suffer from diabetes or who got a high blood pressure or any other serious illnesses.
So basically, we're going to have to get a break, unfortunately, but basically keep an eye on things as much as you possibly can. Thank you very much indeed. Last weekend, Pakistani Prime Minister Imran Khan called for debt relief for developing countries to help them combat coronavirus to be put to one side. And in an appeal to world leaders and global financial institutions, Mr. Khan said in a recorded message that the biggest fear is people dying of hunger due to the lockdown. Let's take a look and see what he said.
Today I'm reaching out to the world community in the context of dealing with this unprecedented challenge posed by the coronavirus. We see two different responses, one in the developing world and one in the developed world. While in the developed world, the main dilemma is containing the coronavirus through lockdowns and then dealing with the economic impact. In the developing world, apart from containing the virus and dealing with the economic crisis, our biggest worry now is people dying of hunger. So the dilemma, on one side, stopping people dying from the virus, on the other hand, preventing deaths from hunger as a result of the lockdown. The problem they face now is a lack of fiscal space. We do not have the money to spend on already the overstretched health services, and secondly, to stop people from dying of hunger. Therefore, I will be appealing to the world leaders, to the heads of financial institutions, to the Secretary General of United Nations, to launch an initiative that will give debt relief to developing countries to combat the coronavirus.
What an interesting, heartfelt message. And although, as he said, in the developed world, we don't have those levels of poverty and desperation that some of the developing countries have. You must have come across in your work, people even within our developed countries who are really struggling because we do have poverty, maybe not on the same scale. Mm-hmm. What sort of things can people do to maybe help people who are significantly less well off than they are?
I feed the homeless every week, and one of the big dilemmas we had was all the restaurants shut down a couple of weeks ago, all the takeaways, everything. So all of a sudden there was a big dilemma. How are we going to feed the homeless where we haven't got any food? And I put a message out to all the community, and you would not believe, within a couple of minutes I had 50 ladies saying we will cook this week. So I've put them all on a rota, and every week now the ladies are cooking away dishes for the homeless. If the government can afford it, some of the things the government have done is they've put the homeless in hotels, and the hotels are now feeding them. Some restaurants in this country have come forward and said if there is anybody who doesn't have enough money for food, we will deliver food to them for free. And that is actually happening.
And as we said before, we are seeing some of the best in people. We hear about the COVIDiots, as they've been called, the people who, just are not responding to the government advice. But there are a tremendous amount of good things happening. Yes. And as you say, charities working exceptionally hard, looking after more vulnerable people in our society.
Definitely.
And certainly we'd love to hear if you've got any calls about that, if you've got calls about just general health and anything to do with coronavirus, then of course please do get on the phone lines and give us a call, or send in your emails, and my producer will certainly tell me any of your questions that you've got coming in. We would certainly love to hear them from you, so please do get in touch. We'd very much appreciate it. And Doctor, again, we've talked a lot about the poverty. It's very difficult if you can't look after yourself, if you can't feed yourself well enough, if you can't cope with what's going on around you. What kind of medical solution is there for that?
It's a very tricky situation, to be honest with you, and especially the message from Pakistan. I think that there's a huge number of people who are under the poverty line, and they find it hard to feed themselves on a daily basis anyway. Among all of this, now they are in this situation, in this pandemic, where they can't even go to work, where the wages are low, and they cannot feed themselves nor their family. So the protection and saving themselves from corona become a secondary problem, actually. And
maybe here, because we've just got somebody calling in, which I want to take this call, but one of the things there is really to be aware of your neighbours, aware of people, and just help where you can, and that's a humanitarian approach that's, the teachings of Islam promote all the time.
Yes. Shopping is another one, you can do shopping for neighbours.
We've got Holly from East London on the line. Very good afternoon to you, Holly. What would you like to ask?
Hi, Alistair. I just want to say, really love the show. I think it's great in this current climate, obviously. I just want to ask, Wales recently rolled out a law where people that are still in the workplace have to have a distance of 2 metres. Do you think that for those that still have to go to work, will have this imposed in Britain, and even after the lockdown, do you think this is something that could be a possibility just to help it finally clear?
That's a really good point. Thank you very much indeed for your call, Holly, and for your kind comments. And it's an interesting thing, isn't it? Because my understanding was that any business that is still operating, any form of organisation that's still operating, that they should be putting in these social distancing measures. And what we heard from Holly there in Wales, you know, that they're enforcing it more, that doesn't seem to be happening in the rest of the UK.
I think passing a law, I think people should be responsible themselves in this. I mean, I think the information is everywhere. Everywhere has been, I think all of media channels, other places, they're all advertising about this, how to keep the distance, social distancing and everything. I think people are aware of that. I think everybody has their own responsibility. People should take their responsibility and do the right things.
And actually, we're seeing a lot of naming and shaming on social media, aren't we, of organisations that aren't doing it.
Yeah. I mean, every organisation, either small or big, I think people who are more aware of these things, because you will find some people who don't either believe on it or who are not careful. But I think the responsibility of the other individuals is to educate people and remind them every day that, and I do it on my workplace. Everybody should actually follow that.
And actually, that's a really good point. If you're in a workplace that they're not doing this, then alert them to it, and maybe name and shame if they're not. Now we've got Ali from Southsea down there on the south coast. A very good afternoon to you. What would you like to ask?
Yes, good afternoon. Assalamu alaikum. Yes, regarding, I did call about 10 days ago, and my GP told me that to stay indoors. I had some symptoms, but not specifically, not like a typical corona symptoms. I'm having basically, this is the 3rd week now. Fever, I feel really weak, and the doctor told me just to stay indoors and taking paracetamol for 3 weeks. So I just wonder, am I deficiency of maybe of a zinc or potassium, or what shall I do? Shall I take a blood test?
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Ali, for that question. And this is a really good one, isn't it? Because, people often are confused with the symptoms and how long the symptoms last for. What's the typical path from first symptoms all the way through? What would people normally experience?
I think the question about symptoms is it's a rough guidelines. It's not 100%. It can differ, and I know a lot of people who had symptoms after 2 weeks as well. But the rough guideline is from 1 week to 2 weeks. For one day to 14 days are the normal symptoms. The symptoms start or can be from fever, cough, runny nose. Some people have no symptoms as well, actually, and ultimately a serious symptom can be shortness of breath, etc. But not necessarily everybody will get all those symptoms as well. Remember that. The main thing where we are advocating people is, if you're not short of breath and if you're having just fever which is settled down with the paracetamol, and you may have a COVID, stay at home. It will subside. But again, if somebody is really short of breath, we are making hot clinics now where you can go and get your oxygen saturation checked. And if even the oxygen saturation is okay, then you can stay at home. Remember, not everybody can go in the hospitals. No hospital can do anything about it.
So it's really only if it gets really serious, to the point where you can't, where you have
mainly
no
shortness of breath.
Yeah, really good answer. So Sidra, again, coming to that whole thing, if you're with somebody who's suffering from COVID-19, it's within the family, what sort of advice do you give to people just to keep everyone feeling calm and, being able to cope in those circumstances?
I think social distancing, again, within the house, if they have got it. So 2 meters distance you should still keep. And just make sure they're having plenty of rest, paracetamol, all the kinds of things that you would take for a normal flu. Wait up to 10 days. If it doesn't get better, then obviously you have to ring 111. That's the only thing that you can do. Just let it pass. Keep your social distancing, isolation as much as possible.
Okay, we've got Mr. Khan back again. Mr. Khan, what would you like to ask?
Actually, me and my family are at home since the last 4 weeks. And the question is that, should we still have to keep distance from each other or sleep on the different beds, or can't we have a dinner together?
Okay, can I just ask you, Mr. Khan, has anybody within the house actually had COVID-19, or have you all been clear of it and you've managed to stay isolated for 4 weeks?
No. Nobody tells us anything. We are just on our own. We are staying at home.
Okay.
How old are you?
I am 72.
Okay, fine. So the guideline is very clear. Anybody who's above 70 should stay at home for the next 3 months. From April. So I think 12 weeks you need to stay at home as much as possible. Either you have symptoms or not, because it comes under the high risk category. I
think he was saying that they're in the household and there's a lot of them. They've been there for 4 weeks. They've been distanced from other people. But should they be social distancing within the house if they haven't had COVID-19 in the house?
If you don't have it, then 2 meters is advisable for any high, 70 plus.
So for somebody who's high risk, even then it's still advisable to keep the 2 meters within the household.
Especially if people in household younger who are going to work and coming back. So of course they should have strict hygiene things in place and yes, social distancing to be on the safe side.
Okay, very good advice. Thank you very much. We have a call in from Manchester. Very good afternoon to you.
Hi, the question is that I have one question. In my left kidney, I have a cyst, and because of that, I have to drink water. I'm not on any medication, but do I have to take care of this because of this, or in other words, do I have symptoms? So I should be more careful.
Yeah. Well,
the other thing is that I've been in Tesco today, and social distance was okay, but many people, they were not wearing any gloves or any masks or anything. They were touching trolleys, and they were touching their the faces as well. So I think people, they are not, to be honest, that much bothered. And one thing I must mention here, I was listening to Mr. Matthew from Nigeria regarding the the religious gatherings in the mosques. This problem is everywhere. We have a live example in front of us. If you see Saudi Arabia, the government, whatever they announce, the mosques have to listen, have to abide by the policies of the government. So people who are, I think, gathering for the prayers or something, I think they shouldn't do that. We should listen to the government. Another thing I must mention here, in Quran there are 6 ayat which are called ayat-e-shifa. Anybody can go online and can download these ayat-e-shifa, because I have experience and I benefited it, to be honest, in many times. Read these ayats. They are from God, from Allah. They're not from us. And you will see the difference.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. That's really helpful, and we really appreciate that piece of advice. What we should say, by the way, is that I don't know what the law is in Nigeria at the moment, although, yes, you're quite right, the advice worldwide is to close all mosques, but we should be careful that we don't know what the law is in Nigeria at the moment, so that's up to those authorities.
Quick answer about the kidney cyst he mentioned. Majority of the renal cysts or kidney cysts are benign and nothing to worry about. They just sit there, do nothing actually, and they're asymptomatic. Most of the time you find out just coincidental. So it's not if it's not symptomatic, there is no high risk as such with just renal cyst. So he's not in the high risk just because of that.
Okay, really good news. So Sidra, again, with this whole thing of the social distancing within a house, when you're in a small apartment, it is difficult, but you just have to do your best.
Yes, I mean, it is possible. It is possible, definitely. You can, 2 meters is not really that big, is it? I mean, we're 2 meters apart now and we're managing, aren't we? So it's not difficult. I think that we have to do our best, really, until we get over all of this. We have to protect ourselves.
As a doctor was saying, if you have somebody who's older in the family, then absolutely try and maintain that distance, because of course, even though you might be self-isolating, people are still going out getting stores. They get to, even if they're not working, they're still
I mean, everyday items like milk and eggs and bread we need all the time, so people are still going out. You're still opening the front door even for the postman comes. There's all sorts, so still I think that does need to be maintained. And especially Muslim households, I was explaining last time, there's more of a probability that somebody will be diabetic within the family, and also the elderly, because everybody lives in extended families, father-in-laws, mother-in-laws in the house.
I think that's one of the reasons they've been saying that the BAME community particularly has been affected because they're the larger households. And one of the things, we just had a question in from Mr. Huck in Ghana, and he was asking about preparations for Ramadan and some of the things, you know, considering everything else that's going on, maybe just a few more tips about what people can be doing in these last 6 days before Ramadan starts. What sort of things would you recommend that they do, considering the current circumstances?
Right, so for example, we always give dates to neighbours and friends and family. Do online order the dates and get them ordered and get them delivered straight to their houses. That is something very, very good that we can do instead of going round their houses. If you want to say Ramadan Mubarak over the phone, do it over the phone.
Or FaceTime or Zoom or whatever.
Yes, there's so many. Iftari parties, have them in your own house. And if you do want to look at what other people are eating, Skype them and look at the food that way.
Zoom iftari
everyone
party
else is.
So there are always ways. Now we have Seema from London, who I believe is calling. So a very good afternoon, Seema. What would you like to ask?
Hello, assalamu alaikum. Yes, if one is still working in the hospital and the person is diabetic and high blood pressure, do you think, I mean, you know, the person has still got to, you know, keep on working?
So you're saying that somebody who is a diabetic, but they're also working in the hospital at the moment?
Yeah.
Okay, doctor, that's one for you.
A lot of questions, I mean, similar questions we're getting in the surgery as well right now. I think depend on your age, number one, depend on how your diabetic control is, depend or any other problems if you have or not. If you don't have any breathing problems, asthma or other issues, and you're well controlled diabetic and you are not you know, of certain age or above 60, then I think if you follow the guidelines, how to keep yourself safe, then I think you should be okay.
And I presume your GP, if you speak to your GP, who will be aware of your condition and your circumstances, he or she will probably be able to guide you as well.
Absolutely. And recently, the government has asked all the GPs in the country to, I mean, government has issued letters anyway to say that you're high risk, and people have got those letters. But there are so many people who have multiple health issues and not been highlighted in government data. So they're asking GPs actually to go through those lists and to advise the government about those patients as well. And we all are doing it. We already done it actually a couple of days back. So those patients who the doctor feel that maybe, you know, need to self-isolate for 12 weeks because of the health condition and the history as well, not necessarily exact. So they are issuing letters to those individuals as well.
Excellent. So that's really, really good news. And there is a lot more clarity coming out in terms of help and things. And again, Sidra, you know, looking at the kind of advice that you're giving, what kind of questions are you getting asked mostly, you know, from people who know you and know the way that you can help? What questions do they ask?
I think me being a qualified teacher, the rife question at the moment is, how do we teach our children this? I mean, I had a mother the other day who needed to teach PE to her children, and she didn't have a clue, and she was really stressed out because on the curriculum, you know, they've been guided by the schools on what to teach, and PE was on there, which is just, you know, something completely out for depth. And I said, don't worry about it. It's not compulsory. It's not like numeracy or literacy.
But even then, you can only do what you can do at the end of the day. You know, there's no point in getting stressed about something that you can't do. Focus on things. And of course, what's lovely is this is the moment where people are actually taking time with their children to talk to them about all sorts of things, family history, you know, about their faith maybe, all sorts of different things that people can actually be helping. So they're giving some form of teaching at least.
Yes, I think there's so many positives that have come out of this virus, and that's what we need to look at. At the moment, the whole world is united. no matter what colour or faith or creed we are, what ethnicity we are, we're all in the same boat, aren't we, with this virus? That's united everybody. It's giving us time with our families, to bond with our families, homemade cooking for a change, you know.
Yeah.
Think of all the homemade cooking everybody's doing, and we're getting the children involved with all the household duties.
And again, we had Mustafa, who's actually managed to get through eventually, and his question was again about Ramadan, which we've talked about quite a bit. But, you know, this Ramadan is going to be very different from any other Ramadan in the fact that the chances are people will be, you know, celebrating Ramadan as a family all together all the time.
Yes,
and that's going to be quite a different dynamic, isn't it?
I'll tell you, the other big stress at the moment is Ramadan's coming up. How do we go out shopping to get our Ramadan shopping? Because that is not an online job, which some of those things you can't get them in Sainsbury's or Tesco. So the biggest stress now at the moment is how do we go out and get our meat shopping, our halal meat shopping, our samosas, our pakoras, all the stuff that we eat in Ramadan. So they have to take the trip out.
But again, you know, I think you touched on it earlier on, and again, it's that practicality thing, isn't it? And I know the word that's been used many times by the different sheikhs and different people who've been on the show. It's about the intention, isn't it?
Yes.
And as long as your intention follows the word of the Quran, then actually you're absolutely fine,
Yes.
you know, in what you're doing, aren't you?
And be humble, stick to basics. That's what our religion tells us. And all of this virus business is making us go humble and going right down to basics, going right down to lifestyles the way we lived as children.
And maybe, Sidra, you can advise them to stay away from pakora
Well,
this Ramadan.
unfortunately, that
because
is the
it's
end
bad
of
for health.
That is the end of the show. We're just getting, again, it feels like every time we're just getting going, but unfortunately, that is all we have time for. I'd like to thank our guests again, General Practitioner Dr. Imran Gohar, and of course, Sidra Naeem, who's a Muslim chaplain and alimah. Thank you so much indeed, both of you, for coming on the show. Thank you for all your calls. Remember, for the latest and most accurate information about the coronavirus, visit 111.nhs.uk/COVID-19. The address is on the bottom. And remember, if you have symptoms that worsen or symptoms that last longer than 7 days, then you should again call NHS 111. Of course, if you'd like to get in touch at any stage, then you can do so with us here on the show by emailing healthshow@islamchannel.tv. We look forward to receiving your questions again for our next show, which will be on Sunday. Once again, we must stress that should you suffer from any medical problems or health concerns, it's always highly recommended that you contact your doctor or GP, as the Health Show gives you an alternative viewpoint to the health concern being discussed. As I said, join us again on Sunday. It's at 3 p.m. UK time, where we'll be bringing you another live show with the very latest on the coronavirus in that special show. Goodbye for now. Assalamu alaikum.